The air in the restaurant was thick with cigar smoke and the scent of money. Old money. Leo Gallo sat at his usual table in the back, a ghost in a tailored suit. His presence was an anchor, pulling the entire room into a state of quiet deference. Men with hard eyes and expensive watches spoke in hushed tones, their laughter never quite reaching their eyes. Leo did not laugh. He listened. He watched. His world was a machine of leverage and consequence, and he was its master mechanic. Tonight, the machine was running smoothly. A deal was closed. A rival was absorbed. His city, his rules. He signaled to his driver with a slight nod. It was time to go home. Home was a penthouse apartment that overlooked the city like a hawk's nest. It was cold and clean and empty. Just the way he liked it. His two bodyguards, shadows in dark suits, moved with him in perfect, silent sync. They opened the heavy oak door, and the street sounds of the city rushed in, a brief, chaotic intrusion into their controlled world. The night was cool. The black sedan waited at the curb, its engine a low purr. It was more than a car, it was a statement. Polished. Impenetrable. Untouchable. Like the man it belonged to. Leo settled into the plush leather of the back seat. He closed his eyes, the day's calculations scrolling behind his eyelids. The car pulled away from the curb, a silent predator joining the flow of traffic. Then, it happened. A screech of failing brakes. A sickening crunch of metal on metal. The world lurched violently. Leo's eyes snapped open. A beat-up, pale blue sedan had slammed into the rear passenger side of his car. His fortress had been breached. For a moment, there was only silence. The kind of silence that comes after a bomb goes off. Then, his men were moving. Marco, his most trusted lieutenant, was already out of the passenger seat, his hand inside his jacket. The driver was on the phone, his voice a low, urgent growl. This was the protocol. Contain. Control. Eliminate the problem. The door of the blue sedan creaked open. A woman stumbled out. She was young, her face pale with terror. Her clothes were simple, worn. A nurse's uniform. She stared at the damage, her hand flying to her mouth. Tears welled in her eyes. "Oh no," she whispered, the words lost in the city noise. "No, no, no." Marco took a step toward her, his expression grim. This was a complication. A messy one. But then, the back door of the sedan opened again. A small boy, no older than 5, climbed out. He had wide, frightened eyes and a smudge of chocolate on his cheek. He ran to his mother and buried his face in her legs, his small body trembling. Leo saw him. And the world stopped turning. The calculations in his head vanished. The deals, the money, the power, it all faded into nothing. He saw the boy, and he saw a ghost. The ghost of a life he never got to live. The woman was sobbing now, trying to comfort her son while her own world was visibly crumbling. "I'm so sorry," she said to no one in particular. "My brakes, they didn't work." Marco was about to speak, to take charge, to make the problem disappear. But Leo raised a hand. A simple, quiet gesture. It stopped Marco cold. He turned, his expression a mixture of confusion and concern. The boss never intervened. Not like this. Leo's eyes were fixed on the woman and her child. The hard lines of his face seemed to soften, replaced by an expression Marco had never seen before. It was not pity. It was something deeper. Something that looked almost like pain. The woman finally looked up, her gaze meeting Leo's through the window. She saw a man in an expensive suit, a man from a world she could never comprehend. She saw the architect of her ruin. But Leo saw something else entirely. He saw a memory. A faded photograph. A promise broken by fate. He opened his door and stepped out into the night. The air was cold on his face. He felt it for the first time all evening. He was no longer a ghost in a machine. He was a man standing on a city street, staring at a ghost of his own. And in that moment, all of his rules began to break. Stay with me until the end, because what happens next is not just a story about a car crash. It is a story about how the most broken things can sometimes put a person back together again. We appreciate you being part of our community. If you enjoy our stories, please take a moment to like this video and hit the subscribe button. And let us know where you are watching from in the comments below. We love seeing how far our stories travel. Now, let's get started. Leo Gallo was a name spoken in whispers. It was a name associated with fear, with power, with a kind of order that existed in the shadows of the law. His empire was vast, a complex web of legitimate businesses built on a foundation of illegitimate grit. He owned shipping companies and construction firms. He controlled unions and invested in technology startups. But beneath it all was the truth of his power. A truth that made politicians take his calls and police captains look the other way. He was a king in a kingdom of his own making. But his crown was heavy. Leo operated by a code, a set of rules as rigid and unyielding as steel. His word was his bond. Betrayal was met with swift and permanent consequence. But the first and most sacred rule, the one carved into the very soul of his organization, was simple. No harm to the innocent. Women and children were off limits. They were to be protected. To violate that rule was to invite a wrath that was absolute. This rule was not born of strategy. It was born of pain. 20 years ago, Leo Gallo was a different man. He was younger, hungrier, still building his empire. He had a wife, Elena. She had a smile that could disarm armies and a laugh that was the only music he ever needed to hear. They were expecting their first child. A son. One rainy afternoon, a rival, desperate and foolish, decided to send Leo a message. They tampered with the brakes on his car. But Leo was not in the car that day. Elena was. The message was delivered. Leo lost everything in a single, screeching moment. His wife. His unborn son. His future. The man he was died with them on that wet pavement. The man who was left was harder, colder, a fortress of grief and fury. The rivals who sent the message were erased from the earth. Their names, their families, their entire existence. It was a lesson whispered in the underworld for decades. Do not touch what belongs to Leo Gallo. But more than that, it became his core principle. The world was a dangerous place. He would be its most dangerous predator, but he would never, ever prey on the weak. He would be the wall between the wolves and the lambs. His penthouse was a museum of his success. Art worth millions hung on the walls. Furniture that was more sculpture than seating filled the vast, empty rooms. But on his nightstand, next to a bed that was always cold, sat a single, small, silver frame. In it was a faded photograph of Elena, her smile radiant, her hand resting on her swollen belly. It was the only personal item he owned. The only piece of the old Leo that remained. Every night, he looked at that photo. And every night, the ghost of his son asked a silent question he could never answer. So when he saw the small boy with the chocolate on his cheek, trembling behind his mother, it was not just a boy he saw. He saw the life that was stolen from him. He saw a second chance, not for him, but for them. He had Marco handle the immediate aftermath of the crash. The police were discreetly managed. The car was towed. He sent the woman and her son home in a hired car, a silent, comfortable vehicle that was a world away from their own damaged sedan. He did not get her name. He did not need to. He had her license plate. The next morning, a file was on his desk. It was thin, but it told a story of quiet desperation. Her name was Clara Reed. Age 32. Widow. Her husband, a construction worker named David, had died 2 years ago from a sudden, aggressive illness. The medical bills had been catastrophic. She was a registered nurse, working double shifts at the city hospital, but it was like trying to empty the ocean with a teaspoon. She was drowning. The report included details about the car. The brakes were, indeed, shot. A mechanic's estimate from 3 months prior was in the file, marked declined. She could not afford to fix them. She was driving a death trap because she had no other choice. She had been rushing to pick up her son, Sam, from a low-cost daycare that charged a steep late fee for every minute past 6. She was already 5 minutes late when she hit Leo's car. Leo closed his eyes. He could feel the shape of her panic. The frantic race against the clock. The crushing weight of a life where every single dollar was already accounted for. But there was another page in the file. A darker one. It detailed a series of loans taken out by her late husband. Not from a bank. From a loan shark. A man named Silas Thorne. Thorne was a parasite. He fed on the desperation of good people who had run out of options. His interest rates were criminal, his collection methods brutal. The file noted that since her husband's death, Thorne had transferred the debt to Clara. He had been harassing her. Threatening calls. Notes left on her door. Men waiting in cars outside her apartment building. He was squeezing her, enjoying the power he held over a grieving widow and her child. Leo felt a cold, familiar anger rise in his chest. This was a violation. A deep and unforgivable one. Silas Thorne was a wolf, and he was hunting a lamb that had strayed into Leo's pasture. He picked up a photograph tucked into the file. It was a candid shot, taken from a distance by one of his men. Clara and Sam were in a small park. She was pushing him on a swing. Her face, even from afar, looked exhausted. But as she looked at her son, a small, genuine smile touched her lips. It was a smile of pure, fierce love. The kind of love that keeps a person going when everything else is gone. It was a smile that reminded him of Elena. Leo stared at the photo for a long, long time. The city hummed below his window, indifferent. But in the sterile quiet of his office, a war was being waged. The man he was versus the man he had to be. The boss versus the ghost. He thought of Clara's life. A tiny apartment in a rundown building. The smell of disinfectant from her uniform. The constant, gnawing anxiety of overdue bills. The fear every time the phone rang. He imagined her tucking her son into bed, reading him a story, her voice soft, trying to build a fortress of normalcy around him while the walls of her own life were caving in. She was a good mother. A good person. Caught in the gears of a cruel world. And now, caught in the gears of his. Marco entered the office without knocking. Only he was allowed to. The car is at the shop, Marco said, his voice practical. The estimate is high, but we can cover it. I assume you want me to send her a check for her own vehicle and we close the book on this. It was the logical move. The business move. Clean. Efficient. No loose ends. Leo did not look up from the file. What do you know about Silas Thorne? He asked, his voice quiet. Marco paused. Thorne? He's a bottom feeder. A nobody. Operates out of a grimy office downtown. Preys on the desperate. Why? Leo slid the file across the vast expanse of his desk. Marco picked it up and began to read. His expression shifted from professional detachment to a grim understanding. He saw the medical bills. The loan agreements. The notes on the harassment. He looked at the photo of the mother and son on the swing. He put the file down. Boss, Marco said, his voice careful. This is not our world. This is civilian trouble. You pay her damages, you make sure her car is fixed. You can even send her an anonymous envelope with cash. But this, getting involved with Thorne over this, it's messy. It's personal. Leo finally looked up. His eyes were like chips of granite. He is threatening a woman and a child, Leo stated. It was not a question. It was a verdict. He's a scumbag, Marco agreed. The world is full of them. We can't fix all of it. I can fix this part of it, Leo said. Marco sighed. He had known Leo for 25 years. He had seen him build an empire, crush his enemies, and navigate treacherous political waters with a surgeon's precision. But he had also been there the day Elena died. He had been the one to hold Leo up at the funeral, feeling the tremors of a grief so profound it threatened to shatter the man to dust. He knew what this was about. Leo, he said, using his first name, a privilege reserved for moments like this. This isn't about Thorn. This is about her. He tapped the photo of Clara. And him. He tapped the photo of Sam. Leo's jaw tightened. My reasons are my own, he said, the wall of the boss slamming back into place. Of course, boss, Marco said, his tone shifting back to formal respect. But your own rules, no personal entanglements. It keeps things clean. It keeps you safe. Some rules are meant to be broken, Leo said, his voice barely a whisper. He stood up and walked to the window, looking down at the city. All those lights. All those lives. For 20 years, he had watched them from a distance, an observer in his own life. He had all the power in the world, but he couldn't turn back time. He couldn't fix the one thing that was truly broken. But he could fix this. He could step out of the past for one moment and change the future for someone else. He could be the shield he never got to be for Elena. He thought of Clara, terrified and alone. He thought of Silas Thorn, a vulture circling. The choice was not a choice at all. It was an imperative. A duty owed to a ghost. The problem is not the car, Marco, Leo said, his back still to the room. The car was just the introduction. He turned around, his decision settled, his eyes clear and cold as a winter sky. The problem is the man hunting her. And we are going to solve it. Marco nodded slowly. He knew that look. He knew that tone. It was the same one Leo had used the day after Elena's funeral. It meant that a storm was coming. And for Silas Thorn, there would be no shelter. What are your orders? Marco asked. Leo walked back to his desk. He picked up his phone, his movements precise and deliberate. Find out everything about Silas Thorn's operation. His assets, his associates, his schedule. I want to know when he breathes and who gives him the air. He made another call. I need a team, he said into the phone, his voice low. The best. Quiet. Professional. Tell them to be ready. He hung up. The machine was in motion. His machine. But this time, it was not for profit. It was not for territory. It was for a woman he had never spoken to and a child who looked at the world with frightened eyes. It was for Elena. The plan was simple. And brutal. Leo's men were ghosts. Within 12 hours, they had a complete picture of Silas Thorn's pathetic little empire. He operated out of a small, grimy office above a pawn shop. He had 2 thugs on his payroll, men whose muscles were bigger than their brains. He laundered his money through the pawn shop downstairs. His life was a predictable loop of intimidation and exploitation. The report detailed his routine. He arrived at 10. He left at 7. On Wednesday nights, he stayed late to cook the books, sending his thugs home early. He liked to be alone when he counted his money. It was Wednesday. I'll go myself, Leo announced in the late afternoon. Marco stood before his desk, his face a mask of disapproval. Boss, that's not necessary. My men can handle this. You don't need to be there. Yes, I do, Leo said. His voice was calm, but it held a note of finality that Marco knew better than to argue with. This was not business. This was an execution of a different sort. A moral one. And Leo wanted to be the judge. That evening, as the sun bled out over the city skyline, 2 black cars pulled into the alley behind the pawn shop. They made no sound. Leo stepped out, flanked by Marco and 2 of his best men. They were dressed in dark, practical clothing. No suits. No flash. They were professionals going to work. They moved through the back door of the building, a key having been discreetly acquired. The stairwell was narrow and smelled of dust and decay. They climbed the single flight of stairs in silence. At the top, a door with a frosted glass panel read S. Thorn, Financial Services. A dim light glowed from within. Leo paused, listening. He could hear the faint rustle of paper. The soft click of an adding machine. He nodded to Marco. Marco tried the handle. Locked. One of his men produced a small set of tools. There was a series of quiet clicks, and the lock disengaged. Leo pushed the door open and stepped inside. Silas Thorne was sitting at a large, cluttered metal desk. He was a portly man in a cheap suit, his face slick with sweat under the glare of a desk lamp. He was so engrossed in his ledgers that he did not hear them enter. Counting your blessings. Leo's voice cut through the silence. Thorne jumped, a startled yelp escaping his lips. He looked up, his eyes wide with alarm. He saw 4 men standing like statues in his office, their faces grim. He did not recognize them. "Who the hell are you?" he blustered, trying to project an authority he did not feel. "This is a private office." Leo walked slowly toward the desk. He moved with a quiet grace that was more menacing than any overt threat. Thorne's bravado began to crumble, replaced by the dawning chill of fear. He started to reach for a drawer. "I wouldn't do that," Marco said, his voice soft. Thorne froze, his hand hovering over the desk. Leo reached the desk and placed the file on top of the scattered papers. The file on Clara Reed. He opened it. He turned it around so Thorne could see. Clara Reed, Leo said. A widow. A nurse. A mother. Thorne's face went pale. Recognition flickered in his eyes. "I don't know what you're talking about," he stammered. "That's just a client." "Business." "Business," Leo repeated the word, his voice laced with contempt. "You call this business?" He tapped the page detailing the harassment. The threatening calls. The late-night visits. You see a woman grieving, drowning in debt from trying to save her husband, and you see an opportunity, Leo continued, his voice dangerously low. You see a predator's weakness. Thorne began to sweat profusely. "Look, whoever you are, she owes me money. It's a legitimate debt." "There is nothing legitimate about you, Mr. Thorne," Leo said. He pulled a photograph from the file and slid it across the desk. The picture of Clara and Sam on the swings. "You see this boy?" Leo asked. "He has no father. His mother works herself to the bone to keep a roof over his head. And you thought it was a good idea to add to her terror." Thorne stared at the photo, then back at Leo's cold, unforgiving eyes. The truth of his situation was finally dawning on him. This was not a business dispute. He had crossed a line he did not even know existed. He had trespassed in the garden of a monster. "Please," he begged, his voice cracking. "I'll wipe the debt. I'll leave her alone. I swear. Just take whatever you want." He gestured to the piles of cash on his desk. Leo looked at the money with disgust. "Your money is worthless to me," he said. "Her debt is paid. In fact, all your debts are about to be collected." As he spoke, Leo's other men began to move. They worked with quiet, brutal efficiency. They opened Thorne's filing cabinets, pulling out every ledger, every loan agreement. They found his hidden safes, prying them open with practiced ease. They piled all of it in the center of the room. Every record of every person he had ever squeezed. "What are you doing?" Thorne cried, watching his life's work being piled up for destruction. "House cleaning," Leo said simply. He looked Thorne directly in the eye. "In my world, there are rules. We do not hurt children. We do not terrorize women. You are not part of my world, Mr. Thorne. You are a disease. And I am the cure." Thorne began to sob, a pathetic, blubbering sound. Leo felt nothing. No pity. No satisfaction. Just the cold, clean feeling of a necessary task being completed. Marco placed a single document and a pen on the desk in front of Thorne. You will sign over the deed to the pawn shop and all its assets to a holding company, Marco explained calmly. The profits will be used to create a fund to help the people you've stolen from. Thorne stared at the paper as if it were his death warrant. He looked at Leo, searching for any hint of mercy. There was none. With a trembling hand, he signed the document. Leo took the signed paper and the file on Clara Reed. He turned to leave. What about me? Thorne whispered, his voice hoarse with terror. Leo paused at the door. He looked back at the pathetic man huddled behind the desk. You? Leo said. You will disappear. You will leave this city tonight and you will never return. You will not contact anyone you have ever known here. You will become a ghost. Leo's eyes narrowed. And if you ever, for any reason, decide to become a person again, my associates will find you. And they will remind you of the terms of this agreement. Permanently. He did not need to elaborate. The message was clear. Leo and his men walked out, leaving Thorne alone in the wreckage of his life. The narrative from the streets would be simple. Silas Thorne packed up and vanished overnight. His business was closed. The people he had terrorized were suddenly free. No one knew why. No one asked. In the car, driving back through the glittering city, Marco was quiet for a long time. Finally, he spoke. It's done, boss. Yes, Leo said, staring out the window. That fund for his victims, that's a new one, Marco noted. Leo did not respond. He was looking at the file on his lap. He took out the photo of Clara and Sam. He had removed a cancer. But the wound it left on her life was still there. The job was not finished. Not yet. 2 days later, Leo arranged the meeting. Not at his office. Not in his world. He had Marco call Clara and ask her to meet at a public park near her apartment. He said it was about the insurance for the car accident. She agreed, her voice hesitant and wary. Leo went alone. He wore a simple dark sweater and trousers. No suit. No bodyguards. He wanted to be just a man. He saw her waiting on a bench near the playground. Sam was climbing on the jungle gym, his laughter bright and clear in the afternoon air. Clara looked up as he approached. She was nervous, clutching her purse in her lap. She still saw him as the powerful, intimidating man from the night of the crash. Mr. Gallo, she said, standing up. Leo, he corrected gently. Please. Sit. They sat in silence for a moment, the sounds of the playground filling the space between them. I'm so sorry about your car, she began. I know my insurance won't cover it, but I can pay you back. I can make payments. The car is not important, he interrupted. He handed her an envelope. She opened it, her brow furrowed in confusion. Inside, she found a set of car keys. And a sheaf of documents. I don't understand, she said, looking at the keys. Your car was not safe, he said. I took the liberty of replacing it. It's a reliable model. Safe for you and your son. It is parked on the street over there. She stared at him, speechless. Then she looked at the papers. She saw receipts. Marked to paid in full. Every single one of her late husband's medical bills. Every credit card debt. And the loan from Silas Thorne. At the bottom of the stack was another document. The deed to her apartment. Her name was now listed as the sole owner. Mortgage paid. Clara's hands began to shake. She looked from the papers to his face, her eyes wide with disbelief and a dawning, terrifying hope. I can't accept this, she whispered, tears streaming down her face. It's too much. It's everything. It is nothing, he said, his voice soft. Why? She asked, the single word full of 1,000 questions. Why would you do this for me? Leo looked away from her, toward the playground. He watched Sam slide down the slide, his face alight with pure joy. A long time ago, Leo said, his voice thick with a past he never spoke of, I lost someone. In a car accident. You remind me of her. He did not say more. He did not need to. You gave me something, he continued, looking back at her. That night. You gave me a reminder of what is important. That is worth more than money. Just then, Sam came running over. Mommy, look, he shouted, holding up a piece of paper. It was a drawing, done in bright, waxy crayons. It showed a stick figure of a woman and a small boy. And standing in front of them, tall and protective, was a big stick figure in a dark coat, shielding them from a scribbled, angry-looking storm cloud. It's you, Sam said, pointing a chubby finger at the big figure. You're the hero who protects us. Clara gasped, a sob catching in her throat. Leo stared at the drawing. His chest felt tight. He reached out and took the drawing from Sam's hand, his fingers clumsy. Thank you, he said to the boy, his voice hoarse. Clara looked at him, her eyes searching his face. Who are you? She asked again, her voice a whisper. Are you a good man? Leo looked from the drawing in his hand to her tear-streaked face. He thought of the things he had done. The darkness that clung to his name. The violence that was the source of his power. I am what I need to be, he answered quietly. For the people who need it. He stood up, feeling exposed, vulnerable in a way he had not felt in 20 years. He pulled a small, plain white card from his pocket. It had only a phone number on it. His private line. If you or Sam ever need anything, he said, pressing it into her hand. Anything at all. You call this number. And then he turned and walked away, the crayon drawing clutched in his hand like a precious jewel. He did not look back. The call started a week later. The first one was from Clara, her voice still shaky, thanking him again. He was formal, distant. But she called again a few days later. She told him Sam had framed a copy of his The Hero drawing and put it by his bed. She told him about her day at the hospital, a funny story about an elderly patient. He found himself listening, a small, unfamiliar warmth spreading through his chest. The calls became a routine. Every few days, she would check in. They talked about books, about the weather, about Sam's progress in learning to read. Normal things. The kind of conversations he had not had in 2 decades. His life of cold transactions was being infiltrated by the mundane, beautiful details of hers. Marco noticed the change. The boss seemed less remote. There was a light in his eyes that had been extinguished long ago. One Saturday, Leo found himself driving to their neighborhood. He told himself he was just checking on things. But he parked near the park. He saw them there. Clara was teaching Sam how to ride a bike. He watched for an hour, a silent guardian in a dark car. The next week, he called her. I heard the zoo has a new tiger exhibit, he said, the words feeling foreign on his tongue. I thought Sam might like to see it. There was a pause on the other end of the line. Are you asking us out, Leo? Clara asked, a hint of a smile in her voice. I am, he said, surprised by his own boldness. They went to the zoo. Leo, the feared crime lord, spent an afternoon buying popcorn and explaining to a 5-year-old why lions were lazy. He felt happy. It was a strange, almost forgotten feeling. The visits became more frequent. He would have dinner at their small, now comfortable apartment. Clara was a wonderful cook. The food was simple, but it tasted of home. In their small world, he was not Leo Gallo, the boss. He was just Leo. Sam adored him. He would climb into Leo's lap and fall asleep, his small head resting on a chest that had been empty for so long. Leo would sit there, perfectly still, terrified of waking him, breathing in the simple scent of a child's shampoo. He was healing. Clara was healing him. 6 months after the car crash, they were back at the park. It was a warm evening. Sam was playing nearby. They sat on the same bench. "You've given me back my life, Leo," Clara said quietly, looking at her son. "You've given us peace." "You've given me more," he replied, his voice low. He turned to her. He saw the woman who had crashed into his car, terrified and broken. But now he saw a woman full of strength, warmth, and a quiet grace that humbled him. He saw his future. "I did not plan for this," he said, his voice honest and raw. "I did not plan for you." He took her hand. It was small and warm in his. "I don't want to be just a man on a card you can call for help. I don't want to just be the man who visits for dinner." He looked at Sam, chasing a butterfly. "I want to be the man in Sam's drawing. The one who stands in front of you both. Not just for a day. Always." He looked back at her, his heart, which he thought had turned to stone, was beating wildly in his chest. "Clara," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Marry me. Let me be your family." Tears welled in her eyes. But this time, they were not tears of fear or desperation. They were tears of joy. She smiled, that same smile from the photograph, the one that could disarm armies. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, Leo." 1 year later. Leo stood in his office, but it was no longer the cold, sterile space it had once been. A small collection of colorful toy cars was parked neatly in one corner. A bright blue backpack was slung over a chair. On the wall, in a place of honor, hung a simple frame. Inside was a child's crayon drawing of a hero. Next to it, not replaced but complemented, was the small, silver-framed photograph of Elena. A ghost of the past, and a promise for the future. He was not erasing his history. He was honoring it by living again. On his desk, where the file on Clara Reed once lay, there was a new photograph. It was from their wedding day. Leo, looking surprisingly relaxed in his suit. Clara, radiant in a simple white dress, her smile lighting up the world. And standing between them, holding both their hands, was Sam, grinning from ear to ear. A family. He heard the door open. Clara came in, carrying 2 cups of coffee. She smiled at him. "Thinking deep thoughts, Mr. Gallo," she teased. He smiled back, a real, easy smile that reached his eyes. "Just counting my blessings," he said, pulling her close. Sometimes, a life is not defined by the walls we build to keep the world out, but by the doors we open to let the right people in. A chance collision on a dark street had shattered the lonely fortress of a powerful man. In the wreckage, he found not a problem to be solved, but a life to be saved. And in saving it, he unknowingly saved himself. For he learned that true strength was not in being untouchable, but in the courage to protect the vulnerable, and true power was not in commanding fear, but in earning the quiet, simple love of a family.